Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the. Sorry, I just want to post these. Geez, like it always ends up with a bit of a delay. Apologies for the delay. Let's just get these comments posted. Okay, that's done. Cool. Okay, so guys, welcome to the Interpersonal Relationships and Dynamics in Recovery live video where Lario and I discuss interpersonal relationships and dynamics in recovery. Welcome, Lario. Thanks for joining us. Lario?
Yeah, sorry, you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So, yeah, welcome, Lario. Thanks for joining us and thanks for participating in this. So, today we're going to be doing a worksheet.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so today we're going to be doing a worksheet. Let me share the screen so we can get the worksheet up. So I just want to let everybody know that on the public channels, which are the ARC Facebook page, the My Rehab Helper profile, and the duly diagnosed YouTube channel, those three channels are going to be live for the first 10 or 20 minutes. So if anybody on those channels wants to participate, please do so within the first 10 or 20 minutes. After which we're going to do a quick intermission and then move over strictly to the private and unsearchable Facebook group, the My Rehab Cafe. If anybody in the My Rehab Cafe wants to participate, but you want to retain a level of anonymity, please only comment or hop on to the broadcast once we've moved over to the Facebook group. But I've posted the link in on all of the channels. So if anybody wants to jump on and participate and answer the questions live, please feel free to do that. You can click the link and just follow the instructions, and it'll allow you to do that. And then I think with that, let's look at the sheet. Lario, let me share the screen. 1 second. Share screen. Okay. Cool. Are you hearing me? Am I freezing a lot? Is the internet connection bad? Lario?
Sorry.
Sorry, guys. I don't know if it's on my side. You're probably not hearing this. If it's on Lario's side, then you can hear this, and I'm on my own here. So I think what I'm gonna do is just start reading through the worksheet. So the worksheet that we're gonna go through is called Identifying Conflict Themes within obviously the family dynamic. So I'm gonna read through it. Conflict in families is inevitable. On one hand, resolving conflicts in negative ways, e.g., ignoring, being physically or emotionally abusive, refusing to admit wrongs, blaming others, leaving. Okay, looks like Lario is back on. Lario.
Sorry, can you hear? Sorry, we lost a bit of internet connection. Sorry.
Okay. So I started reading the worksheet that we're going to go through. So conflicts in families is inevitable. It's just, I think conflict in any relationship, whether it be with families, friends, employers, employees, that's going to happen. We all have different personalities and we all see the world through different lenses. And again, it's just inevitable. Any comments on that, Lario?
Yeah, no, 100%, Ryan. I think that's part of life, unfortunately. I think we are at greater risk for conflict on days where we are not feeling our best. So I think conflict comes from, having two people maybe in a vulnerable space, and both not, like I said, being in a fantastic way of explaining themselves. So that can obviously lead to a lot of misunderstandings. I think when we're at ease and we're feeling a little bit more settled and comfortable, then we just naturally communicate better. But I think specifically taking addiction into account, there's often high emotions, and everybody is feeling a slight bit vulnerable, which could also escalate the conflict at the end of the day.
Mm. So you and I are both at risk on this live video at being in conflict because I think we're both tired. Okay, so on the one hand, resolving conflict in positive ways helps family relationships grow stronger and more supportive. Positive conflict management requires us to ask ourselves what responsibility we have in initiating, maintaining, and resolving any conflict. So this exercise asks you to start keeping a conflict journal to gather information about what conflict looks like in your family. Follow this format and record the conflict in your home for 2 weeks. I think that's an excellent idea. Especially if there's a lot of conflict, keeping a journal of it, not so that you can sort of, I've often sort of thought of doing that with my wife, being like, okay, cool, I'm going to make a note of this here where she gave me shit about that. So it's not about that. It's about your own process. So I think this isn't necessarily something that you discuss, but let's see that you discuss with your family members. But let's see what the worksheet says, right? So you're going to write down the dates, the time, the intensity of the conflict. So was it 1 very low, 10 very high, somewhere in between? Describe the situation. Who was present? What was your behavior during the conflict? What did I want to have happen? And what was the outcome? So just something that comes to mind for me, Lario, that somebody mentioned once. I think I was having an argument with my missus, and I spoke to this person about it, and I was like, she just doesn't get it, and he was like, well, look, Ryan, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I think that there's a lot of times where I want to be right, but I think it's okay to sort of cede ground to your opponent, if you want to put it that way, and sort of let them have their wins, if you want to call it that. What do you think about that, Lario?
Yeah, 100%, Ryan. I think it's so important what you're saying is this journal is not to have a little bit of a record keeping that you can throw into the other person's face every time to say, but I verbatimly recorded everything that you said. And I would advise not to record those conversations on your phone specifically. And like you said, that it's more about your own process. It's not necessarily about being right or wrong. And that I often find in the family therapy and couples therapy sessions, is immediately I tell them, nobody's going to win here and nobody's going to lose here. It needs to be a compromising space where both are actually going to win in some way and both are going to lose. But it shouldn't feel like a game where somebody can walk out and go, yes, 1 for me and 0 for you. So I do think it's not about keeping score. It really is about trying to find the right outcome in terms of resolving the conflict.
So, and what's interesting about what you said was, and I'm gonna just brings to mind that whole Johnny Depp case, right, where Amber Heard, and I think towards the end Johnny Depp as well, were just keeping, they were recording each other. Sort of to build some sort of case, which obviously ended up in a court. So I think in this particular context, what we're discussing now, we're not talking about necessarily abusive relationships, are we? I think we're talking more around sort of general run-of-the-mill conflicts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
Okay, so review your conflict journal after 2 weeks and reflect on the following questions. What did you notice about the conflicts in your family? Look for themes or patterns. What sort of themes or patterns do you think could arise from keeping a journal like that, Lario?
I think you look at patterns like, for instance, specifically your type of communication style. So you might say, sure, both of us have a a way of starting the conversation with something like you always or you never. Or as you will see later on in the questions, there might even be patterns like there's always conflict at a certain time of the day or on a certain day of the week. So maybe families are more at risk for having lots of conflict on a Monday morning because, you know, it's a blue Monday and everybody's a bit on edge. And I think patterns that a lot of couples will tell me is we keep on circling around the same topic. So even though we might start it off having a conflict situation about the sugar or the milk that's finished, we ended up talking again about my mother-in-law. So I think it can be the content, it can be the day, the specific time of the day. It can be specifically the communication styles that keep on repeating itself, or even the outcome. You know, people can say, well, every time the argument or the conversation ends in him walking away, or in myself shutting down, or in us becoming, you know, in some way aggressive towards one another, like we said, not necessarily an abusive way, but threatening one another also. So I think there can be different types of patterns and themes that can play out.
So what roles do you play in conflicts? Are you the instigator? Are you the victim? Are you the peacemaker, the rescuer, the defender? That's interesting. I mean, I suppose it could also be true that you could be several of those things at the same time. So I think you'd have to look at sort of, I mean, I think it's a good thing to do some serious introspection and identify all of these things because, and these are good questions.
And that's why, I like this worksheet because it keeps on referring to you and not them. You're not trying to identify their role or the role that they play. You're identifying your own role. And I think it's so true what you're saying, Ryan. I think you can kind of shuffle in between these type of roles to try and get, you know, the outcome that you desire. So if you're not getting right with playing the victim, you can suddenly jump to being a defender, or, you know, suddenly want to just make peace. So it can be quite confusing to the other party as well. But I think, like I said last week, when we do these type of family of couple sessions, we often let these things play out first without kind of intervening or, managing too much of the conversation, so that we can actually see how these things play out and in which way. And I think also, last point, is it depends on who you're having a discussion with. So maybe with your mom, you play the victim, but with your partner, you are the rescuer, and with your friend, you're the defender, you know. So I think different people can also trigger different, roles that you play in conflict.
And I think this isn't just something that you as the person in recovery can participate in. You know, I think this is a worksheet that anybody can use. In fact,
100%.
So we had a case where the mom was sort of trying to intervene in a marriage relationship for her son, and she was really sort of taking on the role of rescuer, defender, in a lot of ways, sometimes victim, and there's a lot of things that this lady was sort of very much powerless over, if I can say that, that she couldn't exert too much control over. And I think that's also something that needs to be considered, is like, you know, so what is it that I can control? You know, I can make my case, but I can't control the outcome of having done so. And some people really just don't want to admit that to themselves. And I know that was true for this case that I mentioned.
Yeah, and maybe that's also.
Go ahead.
No, 100%, Ryan. I think that's also something we can talk about in another video, is emotional boundaries, you know, and really in like you say, you can verbalize your stance. It doesn't mean the other person will necessarily shift in their views or opinions. So there might not always be a resolution outcome. There might not always be retribution or resolution at the end of the day, and that's also something that's important. And I think with this thought journal, you'll be able to track and see, but sure, you know what, I've tried different approaches as you go through the weeks and you start learning different communication styles. But if the outcome is every time the same, then it might be more the other person's way of communicating than it is your own. So I think it's also a good way of differentiating. Is it you that's leading to some of these negative or conflict outcomes, or is it the other person? And do you maybe need to steer away from trying, like you say, to control them or to change their behaviors or opinions?
So, question number 6. Okay, wait, let's do number 5. I'm jumping the gun. Write about any conflict with a positive outcome, including what was different about the situation. Intensity low, got my way, everyone got to express themselves, no name calling, a compromise. So I had a cool argument with my wife the other night, and the outcome was, there was no sort of like, nobody won the argument, or nothing was really settled, but everybody got to express themselves, and we both listened and sort of made attempts to understand each other. And I think that was a cool experience for me, because most of the time an argument's about who's right and who's wrong, and kind of like, Okay, number 6. Do you tend to see arguments as right, wrong, win, lose? How do you think this affects conflict? So personally, being somebody that's very much disagreeable, as having that as a primary sort of like personality trait for me, it's generally like a win-lose kind of scenario, black or white. I think they say zero sum. How do you think this affects conflict? I think it sort of makes, I think the way, if I had to speak for myself, I think that kind of approach can leave people feeling unheard. And I don't know, what do you think?
Yes, yeah, like I said, Ryan, I think it's important at the end of the day. I think I said it last week or the week before as well. Sometimes it's about planting a seed. Some people, especially when they get spoken to loudly, or the person might seem a little bit defensive, the other person might shut down completely. So they might not be able to process information at that time as adequately as the other person. Take a lawyer, for example. A lawyer is specifically trained, almost like somebody in the army, to cope and to stay calm and to process information very quickly and to think of a response immediately, in a conflict argumentative type of setting. But not everybody is wired that way, So sometimes it's also about saying, I'm going to leave my point there and let it kind of brew, and like I said, like a seed. Give it some time to grow. So yes, again, that's not always possible in the moment for the other person to really internalize what you're saying. So it won't always, really work out towards a win or lose situation.
You know what I find interesting again, and I'm going to mention the Johnny Depp thing, was, they mentioned Amber Heard sort of having the diagnosis of borderline, and sort of how that causes her to interact in a lot of ways. So I think sort of having an argument with somebody who might portray some of those symptoms, like what she did was she would follow him around, right, and sort of not give him the space that he needed to kind of like go off and chill, and I think obviously that's an important thing, that it's an important tactic that one can use in an argument. It's like, okay, cool, well, let's just separate for a minute, go to separate rooms, think about what it is that we're trying to say, and recognize what it is that the other person is trying to say, and see if we can sort of have a meeting of minds, right? But it's difficult when you've got somebody that cannot help themselves but sort of like seek some sort of resolution right there and then, and sort of like almost demand that, right? So that's just something that I thought of. I don't know, any comments on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely difficult. I think all of us, when we are in a conflict situation, our limbic system is flooded with a lot of brain chemicals, and the neural connections are firing at a exorbitant speed. So at the end of the day, you're not always thinking clearly. That's why people act impulsively and they become overly emotional, because the front part of your brain, the executive part of your brain that's supposed to calm you down and, like you say, supposed to initiate something like a breathing time to say, let's go to separate rooms, that part is technically paralyzed. And so much more for somebody who struggles with any form of a mental health issue, for them that overflooding of the limbic system happens so much more easily, and it can that the frontal lobe can almost remain paralyzed for a much longer period than somebody else that can bring themselves back and say, sure, you know what, I just overreacted, I'm sorry. They almost in the heat of the moment can realize their own mistakes, or they hear themselves and they go, sure, that was a bit unfair, I'm sorry, which diffuses the situation. But I think somebody that has those type of struggles, it takes them a much longer time to process that. And because then pride and all of those type of things gets in the way, there is often no accountability of them coming back and saying, you know what, I overreacted a little bit, or this was uncalled for. They often then try maybe blame shifting it or justifying their behavior, which makes resolution even more difficult.
And I mean, even on the other sort of other end of the spectrum, some of them might take more responsibility than is actually necessary. Just thinking from an ADHD perspective, right? So somebody who's gone through their schooling career being a miserable failure, and they sort of like, get to like, adulthood, and they have these low self-esteem sort of issues, and there's this constant need to sort of like apologize or take ownership for conflict, or take on too much responsibility for conflict, because they feel like there's that too, right? Never mind the impulsivity that comes with ADHD. So I know one of the hallmarks of ADHD can be sort of sudden outbursts of aggression, right? For example, and I think that stems maybe from frustration, or whatever it stems from. But I think it's a good idea, from a dual diagnosis perspective, Lario. So we can go through these questions and answer them and all the rest of it. But I think an additional exercise that somebody could do, especially if there's a dual diagnosis involved, is sort of try and link that up with what's going on here, and see, okay, cool, what is this dual diagnosis doing to sort of like contribute to the whole thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%, Brian. I think that's so important because, again, if people are on medication and they're still stabilizing on medication, I mean, the family also, or the people around them also needs to be educated to know that they might not be at their best, or like I said, they might be more vulnerable certain times of the day or even certain times of the week. So it's not to say that we can just dismiss or excuse every one of their actions or their responses,
No.
but there is definitely a lot to consider. And like I think what you spoke about earlier with the ADHD example, is that is technically how defense mechanisms and personality develops, is you're trying to survive your own type of weaknesses or struggles, by overcompensating in whichever way. So
Mm.
I think if the family or the loved ones can also understand that, they might have a little bit more compassion. So it's kind of asking who is the or whom of in the conversation is actually at their best at that moment. I think where the difficult part comes in is if you have two partners that are together that both have these type of issues, because that can become very toxic and obviously counterproductive, because then both of them might be quite compromised in their executive functioning, which means, where's nobody might, or there might not be somebody at that time that's that rational to step in to say, okay, whoa, we need to take a breather or create some space.
Can I ask you a question on that? And I don't know if you're aware of any studies that have been done in this regard, but I've heard somebody mentioned, was one of the professionals that was at ARC at a point. He mentioned that pathology seeks pathology, right? So, for example, somebody with very, a lot of narcissistic traits might sort of gravitate to somebody with a lot of borderline traits, right? Or vice versa. They would attract each other. And obviously that I can imagine being a recipe for a lot of conflict. In fact, I mean, is there any truth to that statement of pathology seeks pathology? Do you know, or?
I won't be able to specifically quote a study or statistics on that. I just think that, well, I think one will have to trace back kind of where those individuals met. You know, a lot of them met in teenage years, when anybody who's sitting with a mental health issue in your teenage years, the mental health issue might not have been diagnosed yet or treated yet. So if both parties are vulnerable in whatever way, they are bound to kind of attract one another. I think the English saying goes, misery seeks company. And it's not necessarily to say that only depressed people attract one another. But like you said, the one compensates for the other person's needs and vice versa. So, and then obviously lots of people do meet each other in psychiatric or rehab settings. And again,
I was just going to say,
where both of them are vulnerable, they're seeking acceptance, they're seeking understanding, a sense of belonging. So I think that also it happens, more often. And I think also lots of people, fall in love prior to those things coming to the surface, and it might only be triggered later in adulthood or after a trauma or so forth. But yeah, I think there is, like I said, I won't be able to give you specific statistics on how true that is. But I do think that in those cases where two people are involved in whatever type of relationship, parent-child relationship, because that we see a lot. Obviously, a lot of mental health issues have genetic markers. So we often find mom and daughter or father and daughter sharing the same type of mental health issues or traits, which makes the family setting very toxic. And then, like I said, whether it is a romantic relationship, I do think it's a lot more difficult to navigate discussions and arguments and those things, because it often results in conflict. And as you said, if you take somebody with one specific personality disorder versus somebody who has another personality disorder, they might trigger each other because they don't understand how each other's brains are working, if that makes sense. So it's almost in some way a different type of codependent relationship.
Thanks for your comments, Sophia. So Sophia posted, I can agree with Lario. Frontal lobe, have frontal lobe damage. It sometimes takes longer, and ADHD as well. You overreact much more. Absolutely. I think it's difficult with people that are newly diagnosed. But again, we've got these cool worksheets that we can use to sort of help us. It looks like we've gone over the 20 minutes on the public channels. It doesn't look like we've got too many people jumping on the My Rehab Cafe group. So I'm going to leave it on the public channels for now. If anybody on the My Rehab Cafe does want to sort of go private, then just post a comment. I won't post the comment, and we could just take it private and then do that. But for now, I'm going to leave it on the public channels. So unless there's a message, we'll just stay on this. Okay, so what difficulties did you notice as patterns in resolving conflicts? What do you feel needs to change to reduce negative conflict in your family? I can. There's a lot that I can say for myself and my family, but what difficulties did you notice pattern? People, so in terms of question number 7, what difficulties did you notice as patterns in resolving conflict? Sometimes it could be that the person that you're having the argument or the conflict with refuses to cede any sort of ground or to see the other person's perspective or to recognize that there's anything valuable in what the person's sort of saying. A lot of people talk about validating feelings. Does that apply in these sort of scenarios, Lario?
Sorry, Ryan, just very quickly repeat the question. I
So
didn't
so
get the end there.
I've heard often about people talking about validating other people's feelings. Does that apply in these sort of scenarios?
Yes, but it can be a healthy and an unhealthy, tool. I think it depends on how you're using it. I think, I mean, if we look at the examples we gave last week when we spoke about rebuilding trust with family members, that was one of my suggestions: is validate your family's feelings. It's important for them to know that you've taken some time to try and put yourself in their shoes, to try and figure out how they're feeling, what they've gone through, because it shows a level of empathy and a level of that you're willing, like I said, to transcend yourself out of your own world and out of your own experiences into their shoes. But it can also become, the other person can also become overly reliant or dependent on your validation. So we see that often as well in a family context. Then the child would say something and go, yes, mom, you agree with me, don't you? So kind of always roping mom or dad in, validate what they're saying. So it can be a manipulation tactic if it's used in the incorrect way, but on the other hand, it can also be beneficial for the other person to feel like they're being heard and they're being understood, and then you're not just listening to their words, but you're also listening to the emotions that's associated with what they're saying, if that makes sense.
Okay, question number 8. What do you feel needs to change to reduce negative conflict in your family? They need to start listening more. I don't know. Damn it. Sophia posted a comment here. You already feel like a failure, so it feels good to get validation of their feelings. It would be cool if everyone was just perfect, eh? And they, we could all validate each other's feelings and get it, So, but I think, it's difficult. I think it's difficult because people aren't perfect. I think that's the crux of it, really. Thanks for your comments, Sophia. Okay. Cool. Do you tend to get into conflicts with some members of your family more often than others? If so, why do you think this is? Well, it could be because of a
I think that's a very good question.
It is, yeah. And I think for me that's true 100%. From my family of origin, so that means my my parents and my siblings. I'd get in conflicts with certain members more often than others. And yeah, there's definitely patterns, I would say.
Yeah, I think if I come,
I don't know if Lario is gone or if I'm gone. Are you there, Lario?
sorry, I don't know what's happening on my end. I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know.
So
The
we,
internet's a bit
we lost you
wobbly.
as you were about to. We lost you as you were about to start commenting.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of my own family of origin. It's sometimes those who are most alike fight the most. I'm from a family of lawyers, so they loved arguing. But they were so similar, actually, that they bumped heads because they all stubborn in some way, and they So I think, and the opposite actually got along a lot better. So it's not always the person that's the opposite than you that you struggle with. It's sometimes the person that's almost most similar to you, and that you get frustrated. I think there's that saying that say that you often, when you experience irritability, you need to look at what the other person is doing or saying, because it's often a reflection of what you don't or dislike about yourself. But that's a whole different debate, and I think it has more to do with values and morals in that sense. But yeah, it's not always that it's opposites that that fight. It's also often people are very much the same.
A family of psychologists and lawyers, that must be so interesting at Christmas time, eh? Jeez, that must be like That must be the most fun anyone can possibly have, eh?
It is quite fun. It is quite fun. But I think sometimes we switch as well. And the psychologist
Sure.
becomes the lawyers and the lawyers becomes the psychologist. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then there's certain days where we say we're all off the clock, we're not gonna argue or mend anything. It just needs to be neutral.
Mm, mm. Okay, so number 10, discuss with a counselor or trusted support person ways they deal with conflict in their families and get positive results. Write about what you learned. So Lario, and I'm gonna sort of self-disclose a little bit here, but I've really, really struggled with conflict in my family of origin, and to be honest with you, I haven't found any constructive ways to settle conflicts, because they can get so intense, and so from my experience, one of the ways that I've dealt with it was to really just separate and like cut contact, even if it's just for a period of time. Sometimes time just helps heal things. That's been my experience. So, and interesting, I remember going to see my psychologist, right? And I was like, listen, I've had this conflict that's been going on with this family member for many years, and I know what you're going to do. Because you've done it before, you're going to try and get me to figure out how to resolve the conflict in a healthy way. And I don't want to do that. I want to cut contact, and I want you to help me mourn this person as though they had died. And because again, this was something that had been going on for many, many, many years. And I've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. And there's just no possible constructive solution and or way forward, because it's just the way it is. Okay, I don't want to go into all the detail of it, but is it true that psychologists generally the go-to is always to try and sort of help somebody resolve the conflict and find an amicable outcome?
I think it's depending on your style as a psychologist. I think for me, because I work a lot on emotional boundaries, I would ask the person first, why is it worth fighting for? Because it is a lot of effort that you're going to put in. It is a lot of time. It's a lot of commitment. It's a lot of self-discipline, to try and get a relationship that have gone a bit astray back on track is not an easy job. It can sometimes even be a bit of a full-time job. So, there needs to be, it's almost like, why do you go to work every day? It's tough to go to work. It's hard. There needs to be something personal for you. It can't just be a means to an end. You get what I'm saying? So if a person can't really tell me what they're getting out of this relationship, maybe not at that very moment, but what have they gotten from it previously, or what are some of the reasons why they, like I say, want to fight for it, then I wouldn't necessarily always suggest mending relationships. I've seen very toxic relationships play out, and I don't think it's our position to advise a person whether they should or shouldn't. I think it's for us to ask the right questions to help them figure out themselves what they need. Is a break more what they need, or is mending the relationship at that specific time? But I think it's important what you said. You don't necessarily have to make a permanent decision. Your decisions needs to be fluid in some way. So to say, this is what I feel I need for now, and that might be a month or a year, but it's not saying, okay, if I write them off tomorrow, then I'm never, ever going to talk to them again, because you might change, they might change, situations might change. But yeah, I think you also need to ascertain how much emotional capacity you have, because sometimes I would suggest or would point out to a patient that they might have so little emotional capacity, and they themselves are at a very vulnerable, kind of destructive space in their life, and they might need to use that little bit of fuel that they have rather on working on themselves than trying to mend too many other relationships. So I think it's a tricky one that doesn't always have a straightforward answer. It very much depends on the patient as well. But yeah, sometimes, again, are you just trying to get the person to agree with you or to change for your own benefit, then it might not always be the case, because like you said, you can't control others. You can only, work on your own response towards what you've been given from others.
And I think, people in recovery also, there's particularly people that follow the 12-step sort of way of doing things, right? There's obviously steps, what are they? Steps 7, 8, and 9. Okay. Which is the stuff around sort of, it's the stuff around making amends, basically. And, so a person might feel that they might be under a lot of pressure to kind of like, okay, cool, well, I'm in recovery. The right thing to do, or the most, the right thing, which I don't like that word. I don't like right or wrong. I like healthy or unhealthy, and the movement towards or away from one of those. But so a person might feel under a lot of pressure, and as though they might need to resolve the conflict and make amends and say I'm sorry and own their part. And I think sometimes it's okay to just sort of, like you said, now buy time, or cut contact completely, entirely, depending on the situation, and depending on. But the point that I'm trying to make is a person in recovery shouldn't necessarily have to feel guilted into making an amends, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%, Ryan. Yeah, it's a process, and I love that word, because it works in steps. And I mean, yes, you can maybe be at the 8th step of the 12 steps and feel, but that's the natural expected next step. But there's no hard and fast rule on, a timeline on when you have to move on to the next step. You can also recycle the previous steps until you're ready to move on to that step. And again, I think it's about making a list of the people you would feel you need or want to make amends with. And you can also work out who you're going to start with and who you're going to end with. I think that it is, again, it's a bit of a process, but it might not always be feasible to say, okay, I'm just going to sit down with somebody, try some new communication styles or patterns, and then, our conflict will be out of the way. If it is ingrained differences in values or morals, then that might not be resolved again as quickly. And both maybe need to get to a point to say, sure, we're going to agree to disagree.
Can you give an example of what you mean by that?
Let me just think. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. I'm going to try and think of an example here. Okay, so let's say, for an example, a parent says that their belief is that you have to go and study and get a degree in like something like teaching or accounting or medicine or whichever, and you go through your university years and you get your degree, and then you have something to fall back on, and then you can go and chase your dreams of becoming a singer or an actor, or so you dream big, but you file it away and you first do the responsible thing and then you go for it. Where the child might go, but no, I think I'm young now, I'm enthusiastic, I have the talent, let me go and aspire to, let us say, try and follow that dream. And if that doesn't work out, then I can always go back to university and study for whatever is the second option. So that would just be an example of a difference in opinion or values, where, like I said, the older generation might believe, no, there's that linear way of doing it. And like I said, child might say, but there's no logic behind that. There's no hard and fast rule that says I first have to do, the university route before chasing the bigger dream.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. That's a good example. Hold on. I'll put you on the spot with that one. Thanks.
No
okay.
problem. Sorry.
Okay, cool. So I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. Lario, is there anything you want to sort of talk about?
I think number 11. I think just.
Okay, so number 11. Write down one. write down one thing you can begin to work on in the next week to approach conflict in your family differently. Delete their phone numbers. No, I'm just being, what do you reckon, Lario?
I think it might be the way you start the conversation when you address the person. Like I said, I see so many families try and resolve their whole life issues over breakfast. I mean, I often tell my husband, don't approach me in the morning. My head is already at work. I'm thinking about the traffic. Like, that's the worst time to address me. Well, I'm trying to think what a good time would be. But still, at the end of the day, there are better times or more suitable times.
And this is interesting because there was some study that was done. I've seen the video. I don't know what the study is, and I'm not sure if it's even 100% accurate. But they were saying that judges who are sort of issuing a sentence before they've had lunch are more prone to dish out longer sentences than the ones who dish the sentence out after lunch. And I mean that just goes back to the practical sort of stuff around, having your sleep regulated. I know, like for me, like last night I was up kind of a lot later than I normally go to bed, or that I normally have gone to bed in the past couple of months, and I woke up very grumpy. Hey, like, like it was hectic, and then have a good breakfast as well, because you want to regulate your mood as much as possible, obviously, because that's a good mechanism of avoiding conflict, eh?
Yeah. And maybe also the person can say, okay, it's not when I approach the other person, I need to let my family know that they shouldn't approach me. Maybe you're not the one that's instigating or provoking conversations or initiating having deep conversations. Maybe you're getting that from a parent or a partner, and it's your kind of duty or responsibility to tell the person where you're at, to say, listen, yeah, this is kind of the headspace that I'm in. I know a lot of the times when I come home, it's important for me to communicate to my husband where I'm at, to say, you know what, just maybe give me a half an hour, or let's go for a walk, or, now I want to have, I'm not saying the person will always be in the same space, but I think it's important to communicate those, where you're at. So maybe that's one thing to work on, is that both parties communicate a little bit more what's going on in their lives and what they're going through at various stages of the day and week.
Yeah, because it's easy to make stuff about us, like my wife could be, stuck in her head about something with the kids in the school, and I could very easily make that about me and be like, well, she's got a problem with me. So I think, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Any closing comments, Lario?
I'm so sorry. Like you said in the beginning, I think we're both a little bit tired, and the week hasn't even the week hasn't even started yet. So apologies to anybody if the mojo is a little bit off. But next week we're definitely going to look at a few practical communication styles and patterns that you can practice. Because again, I said it yesterday to the group. I said, you're not born with communication skills. That is why they call it a skill. If a baby was born with communication skills, imagine how blissful it would be to have a baby, because a baby would tell you, hey, sorry, here I am. Sorry, may you just pass me some milk? Or, I have a poopy diaper. Won't you just fix it for me? But they don't know how to communicate. So they scream, and, they're not necessarily as considerate. But as they grow older, they learn to communicate. The parents say to them, okay, well, if you need me, this is the way of approaching, and so forth. So I think it's important to realize it's skills, and it's something that even though you might understand it, it doesn't mean you will be able to apply it. You need to really go out and practice it as much as possible. And sometimes even doing basic role playing helps a little bit,
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've spent any amount of time in active addiction, you've learned, if anything, to manipulate and to demand and to, so on and so forth. So yeah, you're right, 100%. It's about continuous practice. So I'm going to post this this worksheet as a file on the My Rehab Cafe group. So if anybody on that group wants to go through this exercise and actually use the worksheet, I would strongly motivate that you do that. I think it's a very good tool in fact. And next week we're going to go through another one, hey?
Yes.
Similar to this. Yeah, cool. All right, Lario, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks for participating and for sharing your wisdom with us. Very much appreciated.
Shame. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Okay, so with that, guys, I'm going to end the broadcast. I'm going to play the outro, and that'll be it. So until next week, I just want to mention to everybody in the My Rehab Cafe group, we're doing the inpatient volunteer group tomorrow. So we're going to be doing a live broadcast to and with the inpatients that are in ARC at the moment, and that's always really interesting and really fun to do. So if you guys want to participate in that, please don't forget about it. Cool. And with that, we'll see you next week. Thanks. Cheers, guys.